Kevin. So I know Greg and Jordan, we met earlier. I know Braden because he's a Waldorf College alumni, which I spent the last 11 years teaching at Waldorf. But I just left the Waldorf, and I'll be starting UNI in the fall, where I'll be teaching history and doing some public history. And tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about public lands along the Little Sioux. And I'm very aware you all might be more familiar with the Little Sioux than I am. What I want to do is kind of just start with thinking about is some of your experiences on public lands, whether it's in Iowa broadly, whether it's other places outside of Iowa along the Little Sioux is great. Whether that's when you were really young, maybe those are transformative moments, things that made you want to ask more questions and be more curious, like our Hanging Valley question, where all of a sudden you spend some time somewhere and being in that natural physical space makes you think about the world around you a little bit differently, maybe your relation to other people, maybe to the natural world. And that's kind of what this project is about. We've been kind of talking around this. This is a partnership between our county conservation folks, which Greg had a lot to get this project going on what's the Inkpaduta Canoe Trail, Little Sioux River Watershed Project. The Department of Natural Resources through John Wank, who's the coordinator of the Iowa Water Trails program, and then our friends at the happiest place on earth, Iowa Lakeside Lab, have been pulled in. And I got pulled into this project somehow, and now I've been very deep in it. I don't know. I was actually at the State Historical Society of Iowa, where I serve on the board of trustees for our State Historical Society, and our state archaeologist, John Dorshuk, who's up at Lakeside right now in the summer, and I've worked with him there a few times. They're digging at the Abby Gardner Sharp site this summer. He said, "Hey, this guy John Wank is looking for you. He wants you to write something." I was like, I don't know who that is. And then I eventually found a message from John in my LinkedIn inbox, which I hadn't checked in years. And
sent you a message.
I haven't checked any messages today. I've just been slowly making my way out on Highway 18. But he's like, well, we're working on this project to help people better understand and appreciate the Little Sioux. And I don't know if I've come to understand it any better than that over our different parts of this. And at first he wanted me to work on the Dakota. A lot of my previous research is about what people commonly call the Spirit Lake Massacre and environmental change around the Dakota. People preceding that event in March of 1857. I've given a lot of talks on that. I wrote my dissertation at Iowa State when I was working on my PhD on the Dakota and the violence of spring 1857. And tomorrow night, if you got nothing on, you come back right here. We'll all just hang out again, but with Z, and I'm going to ask him a bunch of questions. Dennis Gill is a Dakota leader who is going to be talking about the Dakota in Iowa tomorrow, and I think it'll be really good. I don't know, I'm hoping to learn a bunch of stuff. Anytime I listen to Dennis, I seem to learn some new stuff. And this project has come together in a lot of different ways. Where I did write about the Dakota for this project, they also asked me if I had anything else I was really interested in. And I'd been out, I run a project called Notes on Iowa, which is a large multimedia project on the internet. And I had just wrapped up filming at 115 different pieces of public land across Iowa to try to understand our public lands a little bit better. Now, we talk about public lands, those could be federal. We have a really strong county conservation system in Iowa. Those could be local public lands. A lot of times they come together in different places. Like, that's one of my favorite things about like the Waterman Prairie area is there's some federal land there, there's some state land, there's some county land, and it all kind of comes together. We'll talk a little bit about the Indian Village State Park site tonight. And then I was like, I think we can tell the whole story of conservation in Iowa through the lands along Little Sioux. So fortunately, John let me do that. We're going to try to talk through some of that tonight. We'll take a look at a couple of the videos. If you're interested in that, at Notes on Iowa, you can see I did 99 videos, 99 weeks in a row. They're all 5 or so minutes long, exploring the history of individual parks and other pieces of land throughout the state. So if that's interesting, you can check those out later. You guys think about your special public lands place? Anybody got one they want to share? Tell your neighbor about a public land that you really appreciate. Ooh, I'm going to talk about Kaler a little bit. You're going to talk about your hanging valley.
I don't have much to tell. I can start.
No, I don't need you to even tell them to the group. I just want you to be thinking about it, because sometimes it's like you find yourself on these pieces of land in the weirdest moments. So like, one of the most significant pieces to me, because of my own past, is this site. Has anybody been down here near Smithland? This is the Inkpaduta campsite. So I'm not going to tell the entire Inkpaduta story. It's longer than I can. If you want to hear me talk about that, I'll be doing some of my Dakota research as a part of this project and a couple of presentations later this summer. Out here, I've also written a lot about this. There's stuff out there if you want to connect later. I like responding to messages. I ran into this though, right when I needed to. So this was 2 summers ago, and I'd been out just like on the road. I was in the process, it was my 2nd summer in a row of filming all of these different pieces of public land. I was giving a lot of different talks. I'd been in Sioux City speaking at the Preservation Iowa conference, and then I had run down to Ottawa to speak at the Les Hills Prairie Seminar, which if you're from this area and you've never gone to that, or if you're not from this area and you've never gone to that, go. It's one of the coolest meetings of people I've ever experienced. And I went there and I talked, and I was supposed to like spend the night, and I was just tired and I wanted to go home, and I left. And I plugged my home address into the GPS, or into my phone or whatever. And all of a sudden I'm on a gravel road. You ever have that happen? It's like, come on, Google, get it together. And I'm just like meandering towards the Little Sioux River, and all of a sudden, as the sun's setting, out of the corner of my eye, see Inkpaduta historical marker. And I stopped and like sat down beside the road, and it's one of those moments where I just felt like the universe click into place. If you guys haven't read, like W.P. Kinsella once wrote a book called Shoeless Joe. They made a movie out of it that they call Field of Dreams, but like all things, the book is better. And on like page 18 of that book, he writes about sometimes the tumblers of the universe clicking into place, and for a moment you see what's possible. And it was one of those moments where I felt everything in the universe click into place. All of a sudden I'd been in this huge hurry. I'd filmed 5 state parks over the previous 3 days, given 2 talks. I've been like all over here, there, and everywhere, and all of a sudden I stopped at this place, which was a deep part of my own story. It is a deep part of all of our stories if we're from Iowa, and is certainly a part of the Little Sioux. So the Inkpaduta Canoe Trail project comes out of an older project. You think about down at this kind of stop. It obviously harkens back to this violence at Spirit Lake in March of 1857. And this actually started as a local county conservation effort, this Inkpaduta Canoe Trail, which stretches along the Little Sioux, and this historical marker is a piece of that. So they kind of started to move towards this during the 1970s. In the 1980s, we see the actual decision for the water trail to come about. March of 1989, we start to see it pop up in newspapers. And most of the newspapers, whether it's the Sioux City Journal or the Des Moines Register, we see people asking why you would name something after Inkpaduta, which is like Ross Kerber wrote in the Register September 17th, 1989. He wrote, despite his notoriety for leading the Spirit Lake Massacre of 1857, India chief Inkpaduta has had a canoe trail named after him. Sioux City Journal went further and wrote in March of that year, Woodbury County officials working with other conservation departments in northwest Iowa hope to establish the Inkpaduta Canoe Trail along the Little Sioux. And they talk about how it was named for this, and it certainly caught a little bit of criticism. And I think we were talking about this before anybody came in. The better you understand the Spirit Lake story, when you understand Inkpaduta is a person in a very interesting moment in history, watching the world completely change around him. I mean, again, I'll get lost in it if we start talking about Inkpaduta. And we'll have an opportunity to speak with some of the Wapakute later this summer, including tomorrow night. This project has incorporated the Dakota in a really meaningful way. Jordan and I we spent our spring break in sunny North Dakota on the Canadian border at the International Peace Garden with some of the descendants of Inkpaduta, including Chief Brown, talking about their memories of this story and their time in Iowa. And that's been a really cool piece of this project. It's also incorporated people like geologists, people like our county conservation folks, like Greg, fisheries experts, and just all these different people to kind of explore these things we were talking about earlier, where it's like, the Little Sioux kind of deserves better, maybe, I don't know, or at least more information, because you start to go looking for it, and there's not a lot there that explains something's around these public lands. And I think there's more questions than answers, but this project means to start opening those up. So before we get into the Little Sioux and specifically the properties, Iowa has a really rich conservation legacy, which may be hard to understand today. If you look at by the numbers, we're not doing great in public lands. We're either 48th or 49th in the country, depending on how you do the math. Part of that is our size. Like, we're beating Kansas, so we're doing great there. If we go 48th, then we're beating Rhode Island, which I don't feel like is really an accomplishment. You know, it's not a very big state. But early in the kind of public lands movement in the United States, Iowa actually jumps out to a pretty significant position early on. This is on the Mississippi River. This is taken as a part of their kind of play for a national park that was going to develop out of Pikes Peak State Park near McGregor. It's got some of these folks here. Why I love this photo, and I can't identify this guy, so if you know who he is, tell me. I've been looking. Roger Toll was actually the superintendent of Yellowstone National Park while this was going on. Mabel Volland and Margot Frankel are really important leaders in the early conservation movement. I would say with Walter Beal. They were on what they called a tin can tourism expedition of Iowa to identify different public lands during kind of the 1910s. You think about Iowa in 1910, they hadn't even laid the first significant piece of county concrete highway. They're mucking through the mud, and if you go to the Cowles Library at Drake University, you can go through and look at all the letters of this kind of expedition as they're bumping through Iowa, looking for these significant pieces of public land. And part of it's in hopes that they're going to form some kind of governmental entity that can start setting aside lands for Iowa. So if you ever, I don't know, maybe you've come across this stat before, but I was like talking about Iowa's changed maybe as much as anywhere on planet Earth from the 1830s into the present. 98% of our land surface changes in the conversion from tallgrass prairie, hardwoods, bottomlands, forests, and wetlands as we move towards this modern agriculture. We're talking about 4,000 miles of streams and rivers straightened and changed through draining, ditching, and tiling. We dropped the water table in the state 4 feet. And so by the time they're starting to look at this in 1910, this is an outgrowth of kind of some of the kind of early conservationist work that's happening even earlier. People like Thomas McBride. I was joking to Jordan earlier, I was walking around at Lakeside, and he starts advocating, along with Bohumil Shimmick, who now has a state forest named after him, for Iowans protecting some of these lands and setting them aside. And their work, I always think about, is they didn't quite accomplish the mission. We don't see it until the next generation with people like Lewis Pamel really leading the charge to create the Iowa Conservation Committee, which then turns into the Iowa Conservation Commission. And like in 1919 and then 1920, we start to see movement towards state parks. And everybody wanted a state park. I set out and I was like, I'm gonna film all of the state parks in Iowa. I still don't know how many there are. I can never settle on an actual number, which I know I'm not that smart. I'm a community college kid, you know. I just like to learn things and
PhD.
Well, you know, but they just hand them out. You know, paying them money. You know? I think like we were talking about earlier, I'm just a curious person that wants to learn more, and I hear about something and I'm willing to I'm stubborn enough to maybe keep after it. But I went through and there's all sorts of pieces of public land that go into the system because right away they start to just everybody wants a state park. I always think about this, where you went to college in Forest City, you probably went out to Pilot Knob State Park. Have any of you guys been there? It's great. They've got the CCC Tower. If you haven't been, it's got to be a top 10 state park, and I have been to all of them. I don't know, and I'm pretty biased because I like Forest City. But their state park story is really interesting. People in Forest City thought, well, if people are gonna have state parks, we need one. And so what they did was sell shares locally that people bought into, and they bought the lands and then handed them over to the state of Iowa and said, here, we'll have our state park. And they wrote in the Forest City Summit, they wrote, Forest City shall have her state park, was the headline. I don't know. I love that there's that kind of effort. And as I turned over some of these stones going through the state, this early era is really characterized by that. Some of these are going to be like groups like this identifying, like Lacey Keosauqua, which is going to be our second state park. Backbone becomes our first state park. Some of them, like in the first 5, are ones that are going to come out of kind of state selection and acquiring lands pretty skillfully. There's still some local buy-in and people contributing money to those efforts to acquire those lands. But a lot of the smaller state parks, especially early on, are going to come out of these kind of local people just deciding we want to have a state park, and we're willing to put up our own money, pool these resources, work together, and then hand them over to the state. This is going to lead to the creation of a lot of state parks. We were at Lakeside earlier talking about how, like, well, there's not a lot of state parks along the Little Sioux. Can you think of any? I mean, you can. I don't know. I think about, like, this is my problem, Greg. I started mapping these out, and I started going through, and I was like, well, is Wanada and Peterson, is that a state park? If you're going into the 1920s guide of the Iowa State Parks, it's in there as Wanada State Park, but if you go on the sign, it just says Wanada Park. And if Sarah was here, who'll be here tomorrow night from the Flanders Santee Sioux tribe, she'll tell me it's not even called Wanada Park. It's Wanata, which is a Dakota leader, and it's like, well, people don't call it that here, and then what's the name? I don't know. That's a whole different conversation. Maybe we can ask that to Z tomorrow. Preparation Canyon is one of the ones that stands out to me, not exactly on the Little Sioux, but certainly represented this story. And I want us to take kind of a minute, because I think its story and kind of the drive can show us a little bit of this arc over time. So we'll take a look at this. This is one of the videos from the
Located near Pisgah in the heart of the Luss Hills on the border between Monona and Harrison counties, a 334-acre state park holds natural and historic treasures.
Come along with Notes on Iowa as we explore Preparation Canyon State Park.
Encompassing a portion of the Luss Hills, a distinct geological formation formed along Iowa's western edge by wind-blown soils in the distant past, the rugged hills have inspired humans from a time immemorial. The 200-mile stretch of hills features deep valleys and silt-rich deposits of soil created by glacial outwash. The scenic hills enticed Iowa's indigenous peoples who named the area around Preparation Canyon Monona, or beautiful land according to oral tradition. American settlement arrived in the area during the mid-1800s, and the beautiful landscapes of the area enticed early arrivals. In 1853, Mormon leader Charles Thompson, better known as Father Ephraim, and 50 families of Latter-day Saints broke off from the broader westward caravans taking the Mormon Trail west. Claiming divine inspiration, Father Ephraim selected a site of several thousand acres during 1854, including the site of Preparation Canyon. While the Saints prepared for the afterlife, they built a town named to voice their intentions called Preparation. Although conflict related to land titles between Father Ephraim and his followers proved contentious enough to make it all the way to the Iowa Supreme Court, the small settlement bloomed to nearly 600 residents, while other American settlers also arrived in the area to supplement the Mormon enclave. Although nutrient-rich, the fragile nature of Luss soil deposits made farming the steep topography a challenge. The town of Preparation dwindled over the early 20th century, and by 1946 the site effectively registered as a ghost town. The Perrin family arrived with initial settlement, but by the early 1930s, Martha and Walter Perrin decided to deed 82 acres to the Iowa Conservation Commission. The state officially elected to create a forest preserve with the lands in 1935 in order to protect the fragile ecosystem. The Civilian Conservation Corps arrived during the same year to start work to create trails, picnic areas, an entrance road, and a concrete cattle path. Habitat management and soil projects focused on limiting erosion also kept the CCC workers busy. Intentionally left with limited development, Preparation Canyon State Preserve welcomed visitors hoping to catch a glimpse of Iowa before American settlement. In the 1960s, change and expansion came to Preparation Canyon when the state reclassified the lands as state park in 1964 before purchasing an additional 160 acres from Martha Perrin in 1969. The land acquisition included the site of the town of Preparation and the original Perrin homestead. Although momentum built locally for a possible possible national park encompassing the Loess Hills during the 1970s, the efforts eventually stalled. However, starting in the early 1980s, the state acquired additional lands, eventually totaling 11,484 acres to create the Loess Hills State Forest in 1985. 4 units spread across the border of Harrison and Monona counties, including sections adjacent to Preparation Canyon State Park. Today, Preparation Canyon State Park offers visitors a variety of opportunities to enjoy the outdoors in western Iowa. Visitors enjoy taking in scenic Loess Hills views while picnicking at the park's shelter. Miles of rugged trails winding through forests and grasslands provide opportunities largely unrivaled in Iowa. 10 hike-in, non-modern campsites in the park's southeastern corner provide an option for those hoping to lose themselves in one of Iowa's most rugged landscapes for a few days. The nearby Loess Hills Scenic Overlook features an observation deck and easy access to a ridge-top trail. Wildflowers and wildlife also offer great chances for exploration at Preparation Canyon. Friends of the Loess Hills and Preparation Canyon Group provides a chance for people to get involved with preserving one of Iowa's most iconic landscapes. Next time you find yourself looking to get out and enjoy Iowa's public lands, consider a stop at Preparation Canyon State Park. A truly stunning representation of Iowa's natural beauty and a testament to the necessity of maintaining opportunities to get outdoors for all Iowans, Preparation Canyon State Park shines as a must-visit for all people hoping to see Iowa slowly.
So a few things with kind of Preparation Canyon that are really interesting is, first, it's dedicated to game refuge and preserve, but there's not even a state preserve system during this early era of the state park. You see it show up, and it's one of the things that gets really frustrating when you start to try to do some of this research, is if you look in newspapers, they're constantly calling it this preserve area, or it'll say Preparation Canyon State Preserve, but the state preserve system doesn't even start until 1958. So it's interesting that it's not in there, but we'll talk about the state preserve system a little bit more in a minute. Eventually they do designate it as a state park, and they start acquiring these other lands in this movement for a national park. Iowa, our national lands are very small in number. We have a few different national wildlife refuges, one on the Mississippi, one on the Missouri just north of Council Bluffs. We have Union Slough National Wildlife Refuge out by Algona if you head over on Highway 18 to the east. And then we have some of these other movements that are going to take place over time. The one that we saw the photo before of the folks along the Mississippi River, their Upper Mississippi National Park never materializes, but it does end up resulting in kind of the acquisitions that become Effigy Mounds National Monument, and then the Yellow River State Forest in the state system. The state forests are a great example of some of these projects, where that one shows that Upper Mississippi project. We saw in the video the kind of Loess Hills National Forest momentum. There's been, if you're around here, maybe you remember, there's been 2 different movements over time to create national federal lands in significant scale, including an effort for a national park along the Loess Hills in Iowa that never really materialized. We've seen local movement for that at different times. And then also, we saw a large effort during the 1920s and the 1930s for what was supposed to be called the Hawkeye National Forest. And this was going to be a massive piece of public land that was supposed to stretch from the Mississippi River down by Keokuk in the southeastern corner of the state, all the way over to where Interstate 35 runs through the central part of the state. It's going to cross 16 counties and be an enormous national forest. They started acquiring lands for that, but the project stalled during the Great Depression. Eventually, as land prices continued, it got priced out of being a viable project, and those funds shifted to buy lands in places like Illinois and on the Great Plains. And the lands that were already bought were turned over to the state and rolled into what's now the units of the Stevens State Forest in south central Iowa and the Shimmick State Forest in southeastern Iowa, which are 2 of our largest pieces of public land. In the video also mentioned the Civilian Conservation Corps, and why I think they're interesting at Preparation Canyon is most of the work they're doing isn't readily visible today, where if you go to places like Lakeside or any number of county or state parks, you can see the fingerprints of the CCC all over the state of Iowa. And as this kind of comes through, the CCC debuts, and it's sold by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt as this program that meets his vision. He always talked about he wanted to create programs that created a hand up, not a handout. That was a big part of the messaging around the CCC. where this was a program that offered men, specifically ages 18 to 25, the opportunity to make $30 a month to be sent all over the country to work on different conservation-oriented projects. Over 500,000 men enrolled in the program over its lifetime during the Great Depression up to the World War II era, and many of them found their way to Iowa. I always think it's really interesting that you made $30 a month, but 25 of it was sent home to your family directly. You never saw that money if you were somebody serving in the CCC camp that was based out of where Lakeside is today. I was looking at it as I pulled in there today, and I love that it has the camp on the post on the south gate. A lot of them don't necessarily have that. I always think about it was such a great program to help people kind of get back on their feet, where this one guy by the name of Wilbur Putnam from Dubuque, he enrolled in the CCC, and his $25 that got sent back home allowed his parents to pay the back taxes on their house, avoid foreclosure, and ride out the Great Depression, and helped kind of stabilize their family. He had 5 younger siblings, and his service in the CCC was one of those opportunities that he worked in several different parks in Iowa, working out of different camps, and he spent some time, if you enrolled in the CCC, you didn't necessarily work locally. You might get moved somewhere else to an entirely different part of the country, which brought different groups of people to new places. But you also got all sorts of different training. In Iowa, at Walnut Woods State Park in Des Moines along the Raccoon River, they had a training school where you could learn things like masonry, or you could learn basic construction design principles. And then once you kind of graduated from that school, you get sent out to one of the localized camps, whether it was at Pamel Park in Forest City or at Lakeside, where then they would go and work on different projects, which result in, if you go up to the Great Lakes or down to Wanada, as we'll see in that video in a few minutes, building those classic CCC example shelters. At Preparation Canyon, it's interesting because their work, you can't really see it in the same way. They did a lot of bank control work or erosion control work there. And that was another part of the CC that I think is less visible. They spent a lot of time working not just on public lands, but on private lands, on all sorts of different drainage district projects, which helped rechannel Iowa's rivers in different ways. Over 46,000 Iowans took part in the CCC during the Great Depression. The average camp is about 200 workers. Iowa, we can really see it in different places because we're so well positioned from a public land standpoint by the time the program kind of kicks off. During the 1920s, after the Iowa Conservation Commission is created, one of the first things they did was create what was called the 25-year Conservation Plan for Iowa. They completed it right before the Great Depression starts. And so when the federal government starts having all of these project dollars and manpower to kind of send out to different places, Iowa was able to write better proposals. And when you think about 500,000 people serve in the CCC, almost 50,000 of them are from Iowa. That's a huge percentage. And we can see this today in all sorts of public lands. They build a lot of the shelters, trails, fences, and features still present throughout the state and county park system today. It's kind of amazing as I went and visited all of these different public lands throughout the state, you can still see the fingerprints of the CCC everywhere if you start looking for them. They also helped create some of our early lakes. This state, a lot of things people out here, I always think kind of spoiled because the Iowa Great Lakes are here. We have these glacial lakes on the Des Moines Lobe. The rest of the state, most of our lakes are just artificial lakes. I grew up in Pella, Iowa, where I thought Lake Red Rock was just a real thing. It never occurred to me that the dam was something else until I was maybe in middle school. But the CCC is going to build the dam at Lake Wapello. They're going to build the lakes at Pine Lake in Eldora. And they're going to really start to create some of the features that are going to define Iowa's state parks. One of the interesting stories along the Little Sioux as I went through, and I never made a video about Whit Rock because I don't know, I didn't want to encourage people to go there. That's why it isn't a state park any longer. Whit Rock is a Mill Creek site. It's one of the 48 Mill Creek archaeological sites identified by the Office of the State Archaeologist in Iowa along the Big Sioux and Little Sioux rivers. This site harkens back to kind of this time when indigenous inhabitants lived in these compact villages featuring earthen houses. You can see it's compacted here. If you kind of go this way, there's a big piece of federal land. That's a piece of state land. There's also county land at Waterman Prairie, and there's all sorts of, it's kind of this patchwork. It's hard to get to. I remember when I went there to film, I almost gave up. I should have brought it in. I could have had a good prop. There's a deer shed in the back of my car. I took this off state land. Don't tell anybody. Oh no, it's gonna be on video. Come get me. No, I was like lost. I had been out wandering, trying to find my way to this. I'd parked off a county access road, and I don't know where I found this shed, I guess. But I was like wandering. I was like, is this it? Is this the place? This can't be it. And then I stumbled over this shed, and I picked it up, and when I looked up, I could see in the distance, there's like one sign that says Indian Village State Park. And it I felt like it pointed me that way, I don't know. And ended up going down there and checking it out, flying the drone and doing some of that stuff. And it was fairly interesting. Obviously it's along a tributary of Waterman Creek. If you're down at the Prairie Heritage Center, this is a place you can find if you go looking for it. If you do, obviously it's...
So question.
Yeah.
Okay, so they say on some of them, they say there's a moat around that.
Sure.
That. A moat for what?
Probably defense. I don't know. This would be a good question for somebody.
It's like 4 feet, 4 feet wide or 8 feet wide.
Well,
it's not
sure.
going to be defense, is it? Is it protection against prairie fire?
Well, and that could be
Maybe
too.
more logical.
I don't have the answer.
I
could look
know,
into
but
it,
it's
you know.
again, it's a question.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So my only familiarity with that is one of my first jobs after I finished college. I worked for the Fort Abraham Lincoln Foundation up in Bismarck, Mandan, North Dakota, with the Mandan who trace roots back to these Mill Creek peoples. They lived in very similar settled agricultural villages. They had these palisades that they talk about as defense primarily, but they also built there's all sorts of evidence, and we have these through lines historically where their oral tradition. One of the things about the Mill Creek sites is the lines are more obscure of the oral tradition. So it's one of those questions. Maybe we could ask an archaeologist at one of these other events. It'd be an interesting thing to the Dakota trace some roots back to these civilizations. We talked to the Bahoe Iowa. Maybe they have some answers. I think you're on the right path. I think defense is important though. You got to remember people.
Well, yeah, they always warred, but it
fighting
didn't
over
seem
land
like
and resources.
that would deter anybody.
Well, I got a
Besides
chain link
that it
fence around my property. It keeps people out of my yard, I guess. You establish boundaries and you do some of those different things. I don't have the answer, but
Was it irrigation or was it?
Well, I don't know there's a water moat in the way they think about it. It'd be a great question. I'm gonna ask John Dorshuk at breakfast tomorrow and see what he says. I'll report back when I see you at the Prairie Heritage Center next month.
Or tomorrow night.
Or if you come tomorrow night, yeah. John will be here tomorrow night. He's our state archaeologist. That's a great question for him. This is kind of interesting because the Whitrock site is going to be, originally the Whitrock family is going to hold it. They're going to hand it over to the Iowa Conservation Commission in 1937 because of the archaeological significance. So when we were talking earlier, we were talking about springs. Anybody that's, if you've ever thought about indigenous village sites, springs are a great place to start when you're looking, especially in these lands. And the Iowa Conservation Commission is going to take on this property. They're going to call it Indian Village State Park. They really struggled immediately, if you go look at the documents around it, to decide what to do with this site. Because in the same way that I think when I was making the video series, I went back and forth after I filmed it. I'm like, do I want to just send this out to the internet for people to watch and then decide they're going to go there with a shovel? Or the more publication you get for a place like this, I think the more difficult it is. And it's a site where you have to have respect. So while other state parks are doing this incredible development under the Civilian Conservation Corridor in the 1930s and 1940s, they don't really have a plan. They know that any construction is going to disturb the archaeological remnants at the site. And the Iowa Conservation Commission doesn't have another designation during this time period to kind of protect archaeological significant lands like this. This is one of the things that eventually leads to the creation of a state preserve system with its different categorizations. We'll talk about Kaler here in a minute, which is really representative of that system in a biological community. This is one that's going to help them move towards kind of the historic designation, where you don't see as many historic state preserves in Iowa. You see them with like the other archaeological ones that immediately come to mind are like Fish Farm Mounds, which is another mound grouping site near New Albin. If you think about the extreme northeastern corner of Iowa, it's almost on the border. A great example of a historic state preserve is Fort Atkinson along the Turkey River, where they preserved the fort site there. They're going to eventually bring in an archaeologist, Raymond J. Ruppy from University of Iowa in 1959. He's going to dig across the ditch and into the village and into one of the house depressions. We're going to see the University of Wisconsin come during the 1960s. They're going to try to specifically be looking at effects on changing climate on the Mill Creek civilization. And then Marshall McCusick, who's going to be a longtime state archaeologist in Iowa, is going to also dig in the 1960s. And we see a final dig there in the 1980s. They're going to kind of gain a lot of different information. You can see some great exhibits on this if you stop down in Sanford. And Mark, who's another person speaking in this series, Mark Anderson, who is an archaeologist working out of Sanford and Cherokee. He's somebody who, when I have questions about stuff, he'd be another great person for
I
that
tried.
question. And Mark didn't have any info?
No, I do have a thing about the White Rock Indian site. So it's on maps, you know, when they used to have maps, paper maps.
Yeah,
And it was
I've seen
on
lots of
the
maps.
paper map, and my dad was out cutting oats in an open windrower back in the day, and he was covered with dark oat rust, and saw this flashy car fly down the gravel road, go past him, and it came flying back, and we lived near there. They came flying back, two guys piled out, and they said, "Hey, we're from New York, we're driving to California, and we want to see the Indians at the White Rock Indian Village." My dad said, "Well, I'm as close to an Indian as you're going to find around here," and then sent them to the reservation by Sioux City. But anyway, just thought that was interesting that it was on the map, and they deterred from their trek across the United States.
I'm glad that I wasn't the only person that couldn't find it.
Yeah.
No, and I put it into Google Maps, it shouldn't work as well. And I ended up with the paper fold-out map from the 1920s. That is how I ultimately tried to triangulate and
Should've
found a
asked
place
me.
to park.
Yeah.
Well, I hadn't met you yet.
Yeah, right.
This is like, whereas we got into the 50s and moving towards the 60s, other states started to really create a secondary preserve system, and Iowa kind of followed suit, where it's like John Kibbe from Emmitsburg introduced the Iowa State Preserves Bill in 1965. It passed through the General Assembly very easily without discussion, and it stipulated that initial preserves had to come from already existing public lands held by the state. White Rock Indian Village is one of the prime sites that it almost immediately moves into the state preserve system. It is one of those things when it pairs with, and that's where obviously like along the Little Sioux in that corridor, I think is one of the most interesting collections of public lands in the state across these different designations, where you also have the Waterman Prairie Complex, where we were talking before, like there's all sorts of evidence, both in the oral tradition and historical sources, that Inkpaduta is at Waterman Prairie, both before and after the violence in Spirit Lake at different moments in time. We obviously have other significant historical and archaeological sites, like the Kirshner Cabin by Peterson, that play a part in that story as well. We also see like the Barrow Gang at another historical moment. Bonnie and Clyde are going to hide out in the Waterman Prairie Complex at one point in time after robbing banks. They're going to eventually find their end in Iowa, at least at the Dexfield Park shootout down there in 1934. Just interesting stuff. There's all sorts of different history tucked in there. Kaler's another good example of this development of different kind of priorities for the state park system. By the time we get into the 1960s and 1970s, we're creating another conservation plan for Iowa, and the ICC is moving towards all sorts of different kind of goals than this initial era. We see a major change where one of the things they're really focused on during that period is recreation. So a lot of these parcels are going to get tucked into the preserve system. The state parks and recreation areas are going to really start to see growth, which we don't see as much along the Little Sioux as we see in other parts of the state. We see a lot of large-scale dam building projects to provide, especially near kind of population centers, access to outdoor recreation, specifically boating and fishing. This is going to lead to the creation of things like Volga Recreation Area in northeast Iowa. It leads to the creation of like the Rock Creek State Park down along Interstate 80. We're going to see a lot of different kind of artificial bodies of water created that are going to come out of kind of that era. And I think as I was looking at it, this is when the Little Sioux starts to maybe get put onto the back burner as they focus on some of these population centers. This is where our county conservation kind of moment arrives. We'll talk about Wanada in a minute. Kaler Prairie is a great example, and I think this is one of the things that comes out of, it's going to be designated a state preserve in 1965. It really kind of shows this embodiment of conserving biological heritage, where it's going to really come from the drive of a specific person. One of the things that stands out to me the more I look at our public land system, it's the decisions of people deciding to make a difference, whether that's bringing people together to fund lands coming into the system, or like Ada Hayden is going to be working very hard, and her efforts result in some of our best prairie preserves in the state. So Ada Hayden was the first woman to receive her PhD from Iowa State University, working with Lewis Pamel. She grew up on a Story County farm, just loving the natural world. She is eventually going to catch kind of Lewis Pamel's attention while she's studying at Iowa State. She's going to graduate in 1908, and she's going to go and study elsewhere before returning to Iowa State to become the first woman to receive a PhD in 1918. She's going to be teaching at Iowa State, continuing her research, and she's going to find herself spending a lot of time at Iowa Lakeside Lab. She's going to, this is when people were still not valuing prairies in maybe the way, like, I don't know, I'll butcher the quote, but somebody, it really takes a special kind of love to love a prairie. It's easy to see the mountains and go like, oh, this is beautiful. Prairie you have to see, I think, and understand a little bit differently. She's going to spend a bunch of time here in Clay County. 1943, she's going to complete a study of Clay and Palo Alto counties. It's going to be the, many of the people in the prairie community look at that as one of the most important books ever written about Iowa's prairies and native plant life. She's going to start active work saving remnant prairies in 1944. Working very closely with the Iowa Academy of Science. She's eventually going to convince the state to create their first two major prairie purchases. One not far from here at Calso Prairie in Pocahontas County, and then the prairie that eventually, after her, in 1950, after her death, they're going to rename the Howard County parcel that they had bought for Ada Hayden, which is Ada Hayden Prairie. It's kind of by Lime Springs, just north of Highway 9. If you're, I don't know, there's no other reason you would go there. But you can go to the Lidkey Mill, which is right there, which is a cool 1850s mill. Doesn't work anymore, but it's a cool site. There's also a really underwhelming piece of public land there called Johnny Walnut Seed County Conservation Area, which is only cool for the Johnny Walnut Seed name is interesting. The guy planted 5 million trees. Anyway, I digress. The state is going to kind of buy the Kaler Prairie site in 1958. It's a 160-acre tract of land, initially including 104 acres of unplowed remnant prairie. This is such a rarity in Iowa. A lot of our remnant prairies, or prairies that were never disturbed by agricultural production, are either going to be in railroad right-of-ways, especially where railroads meet in these kind of triangulated sections, or in pastures, like we were talking about a little bit earlier, where they were grazed and they're altered some in that way, but they can at least trace roots back. We see that a lot on the southern Iowa Drift Plain. This is going to be really kind of a significant, just because of its size, that there were 104 acres of unplowed remnant prairie. And it's one of the things that, like, those biological communities that are so intricate on prairies, you can try to replicate that. And I was just at the Tallgrass Prairie Center at UNI the other night, and I was talking to one of the professors there, it's one of my colleagues at UNI, and he's talking about prairie replanting strategies and how you bring in these different seeds. Or like, one of my good friends is this guy named Jens Jensen. His grandfather, whose name was also Jens Jensen, was Frank Lloyd Wright's prairie planter guy at all of the different properties. And Jens, I was down with him at the Danish America Center in Elkhorn, where he was replanting their prairie. And he's like, we can make it look really nice, but it'll never be the same as it would be in that initial kind of biological community. And one of the things that stands out to me in Kaler, and if you get a chance to go out there, is you can see this kind of through line of the incredible biological diversity that still exists on especially these big parcels of remnant prairie, where the Ada Hayden site over in Howard County is similar, where it's a large piece. I remember the first time I started going to the state prairie preserves, I was like, this is it. Because they're not these huge pieces of land. Like if you go to the Shimmick State Forest, it's thousands of acres, and you look at it. Calso Prairie, if you've been down there by Pocahontas, you go, and I was like, this can't be the whole thing. I don't know, and there's several others like that I think it's interesting, but this kind of drive by an individual person helps kind of bring that together. The Kaler Prairie eventually is going to gain some federal distinction as a national registered landmark because of its significance as a remnant prairie in size. I mean, that's going to be one of the things that's going to allow the state to maybe take a different approach to public lands. Now, along the Little Sioux, we have examples like Wanada, which we'll watch this video quick, we'll talk about it, and we'll kind of wrap things up here.
Nestled along the Little Sioux River just south of Peterson in Clay County, a 144-acre former state park holds natural and historic treasures. Come along with Notes on Iowa as we explore Wanada State Park. The Little Sioux River snakes through Clay County and offers insights into the distant past of Iowa. Named for the Sioux Confederacy, a tribal group known also as the Ochekee-Sakoween, various Dakota Sioux bands occupied the northern half of Iowa from the earliest available French records. The Wapakute Band of the Dakota, led by Inkpaduta, often passed through the park during the 1850s, while moving between their winter village site near Smithland in Woodbury County and their summer village site near the Iowa Great Lakes. After the close of the frontier era, the scenic lands along Little Sioux welcomed American settlers who formed the community of Peterson in 1856. The construction of a fort during the U.S.-Dakota War of 1862 speaks to the frequency with which Native peoples passed through Peterson during the frontier era. Platted in 1881 when the railroad arrived, the city grew slowly into a community where people took great pride in the potential of Peterson. As rural Iowa electrified, during the early 1920s, Peterson hosted Northwestern Light and Power and a dam on the parcel south of town, which ended up a state park only a decade later. After the inception of the Iowa State Park System in 1917, locals quickly came together to advocate for a state park. Although initially unsuccessful, by 1931 the Peterson Patriot reported Lewis Pamel arriving to look over a site south of town for potential state park status. Despite the urging of a Spencer man that Peterson residents needed to get busy, the park idea took a few more years to fully formulate. On November 2, 1933, local papers reported Peterson would have its state park. Northwestern Light and Power deeded the lands over to the state, and the park crept closer to reality in early 1934. Over 1,500 people came out on June 10, 1934 to celebrate the dedication of Peterson State Park. Carl King and his band from Fort Dodge amused the crowd with stirring songs, and the state park era of Peterson officially began. Shortly thereafter, officials renamed the park to honor the Sioux chief Wanada, part of a more westerly portion of the tribe. Newspaper reports prove unclear on exactly why the name change occurred or exactly when. The site initially featured the dam constructed by Northwestern Power and Light. However, in 1939, the original dam structure broke under high water pressure. Like many Iowa state parks, New Deal era programs greatly influenced developments. Flooding often overwhelmed the banks of the Little Sioux River, and the community asked for Works Progress Administration workers to help with shoreline bank improvement work. Constructing an earthen dike to protect the park, the WPA project helped to ensure the preserved enjoyment of the park. WPA workers also constructed a stone and timber shelter reminiscent of others constructed by the Civilian Conservation Corps during years of idyllic picnics and family gatherings, bird watching and snagging channel catfish helped endear Wenata to visitors over the decades. By 1981, however, the state started mulling a changeover of control for the parklands to local authorities. When city and county level officials considered solutions, the state proposed an internal transfer from the Department of Natural Resources to the Fish and Wildlife Division, effectively transitioning the site to a state of minimal maintenance and shifting official status from state park to state refuge status. Despite the changeover, improvements still awaited the park. In 2006, the Clay County Conservation Board officially gained control of Wenata, moving the site completely out of state control. In 2008, grants helped fund the construction of a new boat ramp on the Little Sioux River. Repairs and improvements to the New Deal era shelter also helped to preserve the pleasures of Wenata for future generations. Today, Wenata State Park offers visitors a variety of opportunities to enjoy the outdoors in northwestern Iowa. The stone shelter still sits proudly in an open meadow, and hiking trails traverse the heavily wooded park. A favorite of Iowa birdwatchers, Wenata also offers fishermen a chance to test the waters of Little Sioux, either from the shoreline or by providing boat ramp access. Next time you find yourself looking to get out and enjoy Iowa's public lands, consider a stop at Wenata State Park. A truly stunning representation of Iowa's natural beauty and a testament to the necessity of maintaining opportunities to get outdoors for all Iowans, Wenata State Park shines a must-visit for all people hoping to see Iowa slowly.
So one of the things that stands out about that kind of story of Wenata is it is a parcel that local development kind of pushes towards the state system. Lewis Panel comes to look at the site. Eventually, the power company deeds over the site when they no longer are using that mill site. They don't know what to do with it. And then it really kind of falls out of priority over the second half of the 20th century. The Iowa County Conservation System, as it developed starting in the late 1950s, is going to really interact in all sorts of different ways with the Iowa Conservation Commission and later the Department of Natural Resources as we start to see kind of changes in public lands. There's a major Iowa Supreme Court case during the late 1950s that's going to essentially sue for control of two state parks, Silver Lake over by Dubuque and Lost Island by Ruthven, are going to, both county level conservation commissions are going to sue for control of their state parks. They want to pull those lands back to county control, localize, and they kind of make the arguments and ultimately win that these could be handled better at the county level. And that opens the doors as we move into the 1960s for some of these lands to be returned to local control. And it doesn't always work perfectly. There's all sorts of examples throughout the state of Bixby State Preserve is one that immediately comes to mind over kind of in eastern Iowa, where the folks in Arlington tried to get control of that park unsuccessfully, and it got moved into the state preserve system in the 1960s, and now it's just like Jurassic Park minus the dinosaurs, I guess. I remember when I went there, I could not figure out where to go, and all of a sudden I was like climbing down through this rock gulch and up, like sliding into the canyon is a CCC era shelter, completely overgrown. Like the nature is like taking it back. It's one of the, I don't know, I made my wife go there and she got really mad because she's like, there's no trails here. It's like, yeah, we're just gonna climb down these rocks to the bottom of this valley, but wait till you see this shelter. It's underwhelming. For her, at least I thought it was. We start to see the county conservation system play a really, really important role, and I think that's really evident along the Little Sioux as it's been kind of maybe backburnered by the state at different points in time, where you can see this with places like Wanada, or even I think with like the Inkpaduta Canoe Trail comes out of efforts initially during the 1980s for kind of local counties to band together to create recreational opportunities along the Little Sioux. Our current iteration of the Inkpaduta Canoe Trail and this Little Sioux Water Trail project came about because somebody working at a county decided to get real busy making things happen. And that's where, like, if you take nothing else out of this rambling, meandering talk about public lands along Little Sioux, it's that, like, what you're doing as somebody caring about a piece of public land is what makes things happen, whether it's in Iowa or elsewhere, and we all have a role to play in this. As we work through the rest of the summer, I'm excited to spend a lot more time on the Little Sioux, kind of getting to know the river a little bit better, and then also kind of collaborating with other people, whether those are people that are part of the project this way or folks locally that are also a part of the project. One of the things that we want to be really forward with this is that this is an opportunity for all people that live here and throughout Iowa to appreciate what the Little Sioux River has to offer, and hopefully come here, experiencing it, get to know their own neighborhood a little bit better. I know we took a couple of questions during. If you guys got other questions, we can do them now, or maybe we'll wrap so you can quit filming and then we'll just hang out because there's not that many of us here. I do have stickers. If you want a Notes on Iowa sticker, you can see 97 other videos than these, and all sorts of other stuff that I do with that project still every day. But I appreciate you guys coming out to listen. I hope you'll come to some of our other events, including the one here tomorrow night. And I hope you get out and enjoy public lands along Little Sioux. Thanks for listening.